And here we are. So now we're recording so that way other folks can access this after the fact. I'm just pulling up my script right now as well. Thanks everyone for your patience. We just had a little technical difficulty at the beginning. Who doesn't? So I'm Julie. I'm Outschool's community manager, and I'm here with Laura all the way from North Dakota, and she'll help answer questions as needed. And today we're joined by two amazing teacher panelists, Jade and Sabrina. We're really excited to hold our first webinar around the topic of classroom management and student engagement. And I know that's a huge topic area, so we'll have a few minutes at the end to answer audience questions. Go ahead and type those into the Q&A as they come up. And we'll keep the discussion going together in comments on the Teaching Facebook group as well. So now I want to turn it over to our panelists, the awesome Jade and Sabrina. And I'd love for each of you to just go through and give a brief introduction, how you got started teaching on Outschool, how long you've been teaching on Outschool, and what types of classes you're teaching currently. So I'm going to pass it over to Jade first.
Okay, so hello, I'm Jade. So let's see, I started teaching on Outschool November 2017. So I'm just in over a little bit a year. I mainly teach ELA courses to middle school age students. Oh, I forgot, what else was I supposed to mention?
Oh, just, you know, how did you get started teaching on Outschool?
Oh, okay, yes, okay. So I've been teaching and tutoring online for a little over 10 years. It actually started when I had my daughter. And then she wanted to be homeschooled, so I had to figure out how I could transition from doing online tutoring part-time to actually having an income. And so I worked for a few different platforms, and I was in one of my, I don't even remember which forum it was, like one of the Facebook groups, and somebody mentioned Outschool. I think I was actually looking for online Spanish classes, and somebody mentioned Outschool. So I hopped on Outschool and I looked at it, I was like, oh, I could totally teach on Outschool. So went from trying to find a class for my daughter to me signing up. I signed up, I had one class, and I slowly started developing that course over time, and it got really popular. So I had to add more classes, and then those classes started picking up steam. So I just continued to add classes. So I teach on Outschool, and my daughter also takes classes on Outschool.
Oh, it's great that you can have both perspectives. I really love that. Let's pass it over to Sabrina. You want to tell us a little bit about how you got started and what you're teaching now?
Absolutely. I was born in Peru, so I grew up speaking Spanish, and thanks to my dad, English as well. I have been teaching with Outschool for a year now, since December 2017. I basically do any of my big life changes around Election Day. Take from that what you will. But I really loved the offerings I saw on Outschool, and if my son was of age, I would be completely broke because I just thought it was so amazing, and I wanted to be part of the exciting education that was going on. I know as a kid, I would have loved to participate in this sort of community.
Great, that's really cool. Thanks for telling me about that. And I think that's a really awesome background to have. And maybe soon when your son's of age, you'll be a cool parent teacher just like Jade is. We'll be covering classroom management to start. And this has been something that folks have been asking for, to our support team via email or in the Facebook groups. So I'm really glad that we can have two online teaching experts talk about their tips today. I hope you don't mind me calling you experts. So this is a panel, so I'll be asking questions and some follow-up questions, and we'll have a few minutes at the end for audience questions. So let's jump into our first question. I'll ask Sabrina first, and then we'll go with Jade. What is the most challenging online classroom experience you've had so far?
I should start by saying that most of my classes are 5 students maximum. So I have a small group dynamic that I love fostering. I believe that that's where I flourished growing up, because I wouldn't want to share my ideas with the huge crowd, but I wouldn't mind being amongst, 3 or 4 of my peers. It felt like a less sort of challenging situation to deal with. So I haven't had too many issues. I'm really lucky, knock on wood. But the one issue that stands out to me is when a student was very new to online teaching and the boundaries really hadn't been set. So there was no parental supervision, but let me say that we did develop a great relationship by the time class was over, 4 weeks later. So he had his mouth on the camera. He would walk away from class and open the refrigerator, talking and yelling from over there. He switched the video feed to his dog when I asked for group participation, and talked loudly over others whenever he had the chance. So after that first class, I knew I needed to reach out to parents. We talked it over. I explained to them via email, but I would have done a webinar sort of conference with them as well, that that kind of class behavior couldn't be tolerated. So by the next class, he was much improved. Mom was also in the room with him, so it was a great experience overall because it taught me to not be afraid of reaching out to parents and reminding their children that the online classroom is still a place to show respect to others.
Wow, that's that kid sounds like quite a character. I'm glad that the parent was receptive and you were able to kind of come around from that. Did that happen when you were earlier on in teaching, or was that like later?
It was actually last winter, so it was around the second month I was teaching, and it was a curveball. I was really worried about the review, but I've learned since not to worry so much because obviously I can't be the perfect teacher for everyone, but all I can do is my best and go from there.
It's a really great attitude to have. I'm going to switch it over to Jade. What's the most challenging experience that you've had in the online classroom?
Yes. So far, my biggest challenge, and I'll see this in the Facebook group a lot, is the spamming in the chat box. My class sizes are also a bit bigger. I usually tend to have between 10 to 15 learners for each one of my classes. So the first thing, you know, at the start of every new class, I just lay out the classroom expectations. I explain to them that even though we're in an online environment, we're still in a classroom. And a lot of that is about, you know, respecting one another and using the chat box. Something can become a distraction. Like if you're chatting in the chat box, I said it's the same as if you're in the classroom and you were having a conversation with somebody in your seat with the person next to you while the teacher's instructing or while another student's speaking. So I just try to liken it to the actual classroom so you can still visualize and understand that chat box is like talking in class when you should be listening or paying attention. And also, so giving those expectations out right away and then telling them throughout class if it's me, like, hey, just a reminder, during that first class, I won't call out an individual student who's doing it. Instead, after the class, I'll send them a message. So that's why I love the Learners tab now, because I can send them a message privately. And I'll also send a message to their parents to let them know. And honestly, I've had great reception from parents. It's never been like they felt I was attacking them or their child. Most of the times it's real like, oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't realize. Or, you know, they're new to the online environment. So they're just like, oh, these are cool functions. They want to use them. But, you know, just like, let's limit the use of them for now. And so I think it's just that, like, that level of excitement where, like, this is new, this is something different. Or, you know, also it differs from class to class. Sometimes they use a chat box all throughout class for discussions. Whereas in my classes, I'll say, if you have a question or a comment, just unmute yourself and say whatever it is that you need to say. So I just try to lay it out right away, contact them after class if it continues. And I'll even put in the chat box, hey guys, this is just a reminder, and lay out those. And I did have a challenging student who no matter how many times I said, hey, let's not do that. Even after I contacted mom and mom said, hey, I'll make sure I monitor them, she didn't. So there's still the issue that persisted throughout class. And that's when I found out about the hold button. I don't really like the hold button, but I'm like, hey, you know, if I have to put you on hold for a second, you're going to miss the instruction, but I have to do it so everybody else can understand what they're going to do. Like, and then you're going to have to watch the recording of the class instead of watching me. And that kind of stopped. And they're like, wait, hold on. So I'm going to have to come back and watch the class instead of just getting it now. So that kind of worked for me with that particular student who loved the chat box.
Oh, wow. That's a great, challenging story that you shared with us. Could you tell us a little bit more about the on hold button?
Yes.
I think that's something that a lot of folks don't know about. So if you could walk us through, you know, how do you get there? And then what does it do? I think that would be helpful for a lot of folks.
Yes. All right. So As I mentioned, my daughter also takes classes, so I use her for a lot of practice. So I saw the hold button one time, and I didn't know what it was for. So I was like, hey, Jayla, log in. So I had her log into one of my classes, and I logged in for my class, and I pushed hold. And so what happens is it puts them on hold. Like, and it says on the screen, it says, the teacher has you on hold. Something about you won't be able to return to class until the teacher brings you back. So the student gets a screen that tells them you're on hold. And then you continue on with your class. And I usually try to, with that student, like, it was like a quick second just so they could see, like, I could stop you from doing this behavior in the chat box, and I brought them back. I mean, I think the hold option would be really great if we could put them on hold and they could still view the class, but they just can't chat and they can't turn their mic on or off and still interact. But yeah, it basically gives them a blank screen. It's like that, you have to wait to get back to class. And it's right there in the when you click on participants and you see all their names and you right click and you have that option to mute or unmute them. It also says hold. So that's how you can find that option.
So right now it's like the equivalent of sending a kid out to the hallway.
Yes. Yes. Yep.
Okay. It's really cool that you found that out. I think that could be useful, especially for some of those kids who just don't stop. But it sounds like each of you did a really great job, you know, following up with parents after the class. And that can be really helpful for those kids who, you know, just don't stop, are a little bit more rambunctious or disruptive than others. But for everyone, you know, when you're going into your class, how do you try to set expectations for classroom behavior before things start? And I'll start with Sabrina first, sorry.
Sure. Well, it's written out in my classes where I have some of the policies already. You know, I don't want them to come in blind, but in case they prefer the video format, I love making videos nowadays. And actually on my YouTube channel is my classroom expectations video, and it's my most watched video. People go there because they figure, oh, well, I'm signing up anyway. I might as well know what she's all about. So I've learned to get myself out there. I learned that the more they see of me, the more likely that when they come in, they're going to know my name. They might respect me a little bit more. They might connect the idea that I'm an actual person as opposed to someone on the other side of the screen who's nameless, who's faceless, who's not going to impact their lives so much. So yeah, that's basically what I've done, other than, you know, stating it again in the classroom. I really only have 2 rules. Listen to me and be kind to others. That's it. If you can't follow those, then I'm going to have to ask you to kindly sit out, because that's what we all have to do as grown-ups in civilized society. So I'm only helping you get there.
So Sabrina, how do you share that YouTube video with them? Is there a link in your welcome message?
Yes, it's not a direct link. Those aren't part of Outschool's profiles right now that I'm aware of, but they can copy and paste it to the address on the top there. And I find a lot of parents have done that. At least to my knowledge, it's accessible, if not, you know, direct.
Nice. Wow, I really love that. And it seems like you approach it in such a kind way that I think it must be very easy for people to pick that up as well. So Jade, what about you? How do you set expectations for classroom behavior?
So for the first class, I always tell the learners, and like I'll send a message before the class starts. I'll tell them during our first class, we'll probably go about 5 or 10 minutes over. Just be prepared, because the first 5 minutes of the class, like the first 5 to 10 minutes of the class, I do introductions. I go over the tools and functions of the classroom, like how to annotate, how to use the chat box. And then I have everyone introduce themselves and share something about them. So like, okay, what are your hobbies? Or depending on the class, if it's a reading class, what's your favorite book? If it's a writing class, what's your favorite thing to write about? Just so I'm like, I want everyone to be comfortable with one another, because we're going to be here for a while, especially for my semester long classes. And then I go over the classroom expectations, which are really, basic. Like for my class, I'm like, okay, so in our class, I'm going to have everyone mute themselves. And I don't want you to mute yourselves because you're not allowed to talk in class. You're absolutely allowed to talk, but it saves you from having feedback when we're all plugged in at the same time. You can hear the sound. consider that high pitched squeaking sound. If you have pets or siblings in the background, and I always like try to make it a joke. I'm like, or sometimes your parents forget that you're in class and they tell you forgot to wash the dishes, and you don't want everybody to know that you didn't do your chores. So then I try to lighten up the mood, like this is the reason why you want to mute yourself. I'll say something about siblings, like, yeah, if you ever had a sibling come and tell everyone your nickname that nobody's supposed to know, that happens when you're unmuted. They find the perfect time to come and do that. I'm like, so you just want to stay muted, and then I run like, if you want to respond, just unmute. So I don't have like that strict rule of stay muted the whole time. And then I use the chat box also. I'm like, now when we use the chat box, and I give that same example, like if you're chatting about something in the chat box that has nothing to do with the class, it's the same as having a conversation in class. It can also be distracting to others because it pops up on the screen. So they keep seeing things pop on the screen, and it distracts them. It also distracts me. Like, so you can save the chat for after class. I'm like, we'll stay in about 5 minutes after class so you can talk about whatever you want to, and then I go from there. And so it's really, I've never had to tell like a class, like first warning, second warning, third warning, this is what's going to happen. Because it's usually just one student. After I talk to that student privately, the problems usually, it doesn't persist.
Nice. It sounds like you do really well with that. Did you have any follow-ups, Laura? Jade, I love the way that you were drawing comparisons for the students, between what it's like in a real classroom. I mean, what's like in a live classroom and what it's like in an online Outschool classroom. Have you yourself had to change your own expectations or management style when working online compared to when you used to work in person with kids?
Yes, a lot. So moving from the classroom to the online classroom, it's really different because I'm used to being able to walk around the room, stop and chit chat with students and do all those extra things. So I still try to do that in class. So like I said, on the first day of class, I introduce myself, I'd speak to them, and I make sure I'm saying their names correctly. That's one of the biggest things, because if I don't get their name in the first class and then we have a next class, I'm still pronouncing their name incorrectly. I can't call on them or ask them questions because I'm like, oh, I don't remember how to say the kid's name. So I make sure like right away that we're trying to build that relationship. And then I have breaks because my classes are lectured, but I try to throw in an activity every 10 to 15 minutes, even if it's just something simple like a question like, with the writing class, I always ask in every class, like, okay, how many paragraphs will your essay be? So everybody has to respond. Or I'm like, what's the most important part of the essay? Or I always, within 10 to 15 minutes, I have to ask them something. Otherwise, I start getting the blank look because I'm talking at them and I'm talking at them. So I have to bring them back into class. So really that, and just not being after class, like, when they send their assignments to me, instead of just sending their assignment back to them, like if they were in class, I could comment about something specific. So I'll ask them, like, whatever they write about. I have a lot of papers about horses in Fortnite. So I'm like, what's your favorite horse? So when I send back their feedback, I also send back something to keep our dialogue open so that they feel like they have some connection to me as a teacher and that I'm not just the face on the screen. And, and it also keeps them coming back, because then they come back and they think I remember exactly what we talked about 15 weeks ago in a new class. I'm like, oh, I don't remember. And they're like, oh, I had my competition. I'm like, oh, which competition? Because I kind of like, I got better at taking notes about individual students. So I'm like, okay, this one rides horses, this one plays violin, this one's an archery, this one's a gymnast. So yeah, it's worked.
Wow. And you put in work on that too. That's wild. Let's switch it over to Sabrina. Same question, because you also have experience, teaching and working with kids in person. So how have you had to change your expectations or management style now that you started working online?
Well, unlike a classroom teacher, I never had a huge classroom. So many kudos to Jade for that. I never had to deal with more than 4 at a time as a speech language pathologist. But conversely, I've also had the experience of working with kids who had to be with me. So for one reason or another, we might spend years together working on small goals and making sure that they either graduated from speech or that they were capable of handling the curriculum on their own. one thing or another. For some reason, I met up with a lot of cases where the motivation was waning. So I'm really excited by teaching at Outschool because so far I've found that the vast majority are motivated, you know, whether it's because it's only a short time that we're together or because it's a new environment, they're learning about technology, they're on the forefront of the exciting things that can happen. And maybe it's something that they talk about around the water cooler. I don't even know. But I've also found that my classes in particular, they incorporate singing, they incorporate moving around. One of the things I've loved doing is having the kids, you know, take that there at home and bringing that into their learning experience. You know, I want to see your pets. Tell me about them within the context of Spanish, which is what I teach. But I've also seen that other teachers have had, you know, classes based around talking about your pet, making a presentation on your pet, basically incorporating their homeschooling experience and, you know, bringing it to their forefront of how much of an expert they are. And then finally, breaks, I agree, are important. I actually write into my class description, we will be taking a break midway. If anyone needs it, it's going to be only like 3 minutes or so, just if you need to walk away, if you need to stretch. I know that in the classroom setting, I never attended for longer than an hour without needing to zone out. So I give my students the same courtesy that I would have liked to be shown.
Great, that's really cool. I love that we're kind of segueing away from the classroom management, more into the classroom engagement. And I think those two go hand in hand because, you know, there's the kids who might be a little distracting or want to act out. And sometimes the best way to do that is to just make the lesson super engaging. And I love that you both talked about some tactics for doing that. And I was wondering, so Jade, you mentioned that you know, build in some breaks and you build in some questions and follow-up questions to ask. Are there any other things that you do to structure your lessons to make sure that learners stay engaged?
Yeah, so I think mostly having those breaks in those activities where it's like stop, and it's still focused on that. But I would say one of the classes I've had the most difficulty with engagement is in my book discussion classes. So with those classes, you know, I tell the parents, I'm like, your child has to be open to being able to discuss things. Like they have to be open to talk in class because it's a book style discussion class. And then I also have parents like, well, my child's really shy. Yeah, keep the camera off. That's fine. You don't have to turn it on. We don't have to see you for you to tell us how you feel. So then parents like, okay, that's great. Or I have students who just want to respond in the chat box. So we're having a book discussion and they're typing a paragraph response in the chat box and I'm ready to move on to question 4, but I don't know if they're responding or if they're not responding. So for those classes, I tell the students, like, if you want to answer the question, put a star or asterisk in the chat box. That way I know that you're working on your response. I'm like, so it's kind of like you raise your hand and now you're just waiting patiently to respond. And then also trying to make sure that they all introduce themselves. I think that's the best way to get them engaged because now they feel like they know somebody in their classroom. And also posting things for those book discussion classes. I post things throughout the week in the chat box so they can still chit chat with one another until we get back together. But yeah, mostly pausing and asking questions or having them complete something and drawing on the screen if they don't have Chromebook. That really helps. I'm like, okay, draw a line. That right there, them just being allowed to draw a line on the screen, all of a sudden, whatever they're doing, they're back because they get to do something on the screen. So just trying to pull them in, make sure they're focused and paying attention, and also still learning whatever it is that we're covering.
Very nice.
I'm gonna just ask kind of a follow-up to that, Jade. I've seen your class a few times and I'm not sure which one it is, but you teach a class where you teach them about metaphors and things like that. And I think one of the great ways that you engage them is you make metaphors and similes and those different, I don't know, English tools. But I mean, you do it in a way that kids enjoy. So they're not just writing a random simile, they're writing a simile about something that you know, they think it's funny or is tied to their, you know, interests and things like that. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes. Okay. So that's probably the analysis essay. So yes, in all the classes, we cover literary devices, and I tried the reason I bring in the literary devices early, just from my experience working with middle school students and high school students, they aren't really taught literary devices. Like a lot of my classes, I use the standards from Common Core, and I tell the parents that I'm like, I use the standards, but I'm not using the curriculum. I'm like, these are my classes, but they meet these standards. So, you know the objectives, you know what your child's expected to have learned by this grade or by this age. And then I still do individual feedback. I'm like, when I provide their feedback, I'm not looking at, oh, by now you should be here, because a lot of the students I work with are homeschooled. So I'm like, you know what? My daughter is at a middle school level for writing, and she's at a high school level for reading. I don't give her high school books to read though, because those topics aren't for her. Math, she's still at 3rd grade. So, you know, I understand that they're at different points depending on what they know, what they've been taught. So with the literary devices, for that one, I try to focus on it, because I noticed by high school teachers, like if you're in a public school, they give you a list of vocabulary words, and you have to go learn the literary devices by yourself. And so I try to introduce them earlier so that they understand what they are. And then I just go over the most common ones, and in class, I'm like, okay, give me some examples. And I don't care how silly they are. I'm like, yeah, that's a simile. That's a metaphor. Yes, that's symbolism. You got it. So I try to make sure that they still enjoy it. Like all of my classes, I have to tell the parents this a lot, because they want their child to write and they want it to be really structured. I'm like, the essay's already really structured. So let them write about whatever topic they want to. Like I said, I know so much about horses in Fortnite. I can write an essay about it. And I tell them, like, I don't care if all your essays about horses. The goal is to get you writing and to understand how to make sure your organization and your development is coherent, that there's unity in your essay. So when I teach any of those topics, I let them go wherever they want to go with it, as long as they understand it. So yeah, the analysis essay is probably like that one, and my persuasive essay. Those are my 2 favorite ones. The analysis essay, a lot of them still end up giving me a book report, even though I try to explain to them, like, there's a difference between a book report and analysis. But as long as it's in there, they'll get it.
Wow, that's really awesome. I love that you're kind of, you know, connecting the kids' passion in there, but also keeping them learning. I think that's a really great way to do things. And Sabrina, you have kind of a similar style as well. Do you want to talk a little bit about how your lessons are structured?
Sure. I love to bring that human aspect in. I emphasize from the get-go that we all have something to learn from one another. For example, just because I know Spanish and English doesn't mean that I'm not a beginner at French. I learned swimming when I was in college. So there are a lot of things that people are learning, and no one knows everything. So don't be afraid to make mistakes is what I emphasize from the get-go. I also like to give a timeline so they know what to expect during class. I know a lot of times I would look at the clock in school and say, when is this going to be over? But if I tell them, okay, we're going to do this first, then break then, and then we're going to go into that last part, and then, you know, I'll take questions throughout, but if you want to save them to the end, that's great too. I'll leave some time for that. You know, even if it's just like on a simple slide, knowing that we're going to do it first together, then I'm going to ask you to do it on your own, and it has them more on alert, so to speak. Like, I need to pay attention to this one because I can't hide. And then at the end, I like to wrap up reminding them of what I've learned about them since the beginning of class. I want to tell them, here, let's look at the activities together. Because sometimes, especially new as of this year, I'll be incorporating more activities that they can do on their own after class. So that is kind of how I let them know that it's a lot like a real classroom and a lot like a in-person classroom, and hopefully that gets them motivated to continue on with more.
For sure.
I think one of the great ways that you keep kids engaged, I've seen Sabrina teach as well, is how you teach them Spanish. You use a lot of songs and things that they already know, like Disney themed songs. Could you talk a little bit about why you choose to do it that way and how that might help keep them engaged?
I was a little unsure of it at the beginning, but I thought to myself, I like this anyway, so let me throw it out there into the universe and see what happens. Because if I don't get any students, then I won't have lost anything. I'll just teach it to my son. And then I had that first class, and a boy told me, I've listened to Let It Go 1,000 times. So I completely agree with Jade. We have to meet the students at their level, at their interests. I think that it's important to know what they're talking about around that proverbial water cooler and reach out to them that way, because, you know, there's a difference between I have to do this, it's work, it's going to keep me from doing what I actually want to do, and oh, I have a degree of autonomy here. I chose this. Let me see where I can take it from here and make it my own.
Wow, that's really awesome. Yeah, both of you do have that kind of, connecting around students' interests, meeting them where they are, which I think makes for a super effective class. So that's some really great info about kind of like the overarching structure and having a super engaging subject. I was wondering if you could also walk us through, and Sabrina, you were mentioning that you have some activities that help learners engage with your content. Could you give us an example of one of those?
Well, I like to remind them, I call it my why are you here part of the class, which always comes at the beginning, where they don't have to share all about their lives, but I do want to know what brought them to that class at that moment at that time of day. So I'll tell them why I'm there because, whether it's I like singing or I have trouble remembering things, so putting it into song makes sense to me. I've loved Disney, and even though I've never been to Disney World, it's been a dream of mine my whole life. I want them to share about their plans and their dreams. I've met would-be authors and current authors. I've met people who have traveled the world and people who have never left their state. So I think that there's a lot that we can learn from one another. I like to think that I make it easier for them by telling them first why I'm there and why it's exciting to be learning Spanish. And then, as Jade was mentioning, I love to write down what they tell me and be able to reflect on that later on. For example, one person told me, I'm really sad today. I have missed the snow because I recently moved to Utah and I don't get any snow anymore. So then I learned on a weather broadcast that it was snowing in a particular city in Utah. So I wrote to her mom and she said, wow, you were actually listening to me. And it's true. They didn't get that kind of involvement all the time with their in-class teachers because perhaps it wasn't possible, and perhaps they've always been homeschooled and maybe perhaps haven't had, that one-on-one interaction with someone else. So.
Wow, that's a really cool moment. It's so nice that you remembered that and thought about it. Jade, what about you? Could you walk us through a specific activity that you think helped learners engage with your content in a live class?
Yes. So as Sabrina was mentioning, that one thing I saw it in the Facebook group earlier, somebody was talking about avoiding worksheets as a homeschooler and as a homeschool teacher here, as an Outschool teacher on here. I just want to say I 100% agree with that. I avoid worksheets as much as possible. I try to provide links to games and activities that have, like with the literary devices, I have a few different links that I use depending on which grade level I'm working with. So they can go and play a game and learn about those literary devices. And since they're already on the computer and most of them are way more tech savvy, they like that. They're like, oh yeah, it's a game, it's something I can play. But as far as like the activities in class, like I said, they're really simple. Like one of the classes I teach is the hamburger paragraph. So I'll have the hamburger and I'll have all of those parts of the paragraph and I'll just have them draw the lines. And like just something really simple to pull them back in. And then I'm trying, my other one, so when we do our persuasive essay, we probably spend the most time doing an activity with that one. Like I explained logos, pathos, and ethos to them. And usually I have one or two students who are like, oh yeah, I know what that is. I'm like, well, that's great. I didn't learn about them until I was in college. So, you know, I tell them like, you're ahead of the game. You're learning about something that you wouldn't have learned about. And then we have a mini in-class debate. And that's just so they can understand one part of the essay, and that's the counter argument. So that's the only reason we have that debate, because I try to tell them, like, you know what your position is, but you want to include the counter argument. Why would somebody disagree with you? And the one that I let them choose through a list of 14, and then the one that gets the most votes is the one that we use for class. And most often it lands on homeschool versus traditional schools. And that gets really, it gets really hot. So, you know, I always tell them, like, make sure, you know, you're being kind when you come with the rebuttal. Expect, like, the evening classes, I always have a mixture. Like the morning classes, most of the kids are already homeschooled, or they go to a co-op or a charter school. And so that's one of the in-class activities that gets everyone engaged and gets everyone talking and, you know, learning how to have a debate and still do it in a way that's kind. Because I always say, I'm like, oh, no, that doesn't work. That's not a logical reason. You can't tell somebody that they're stupid. That doesn't work. So thankfully, nobody's ever done that yet. Nobody's ever got to name calling. But just in case it does, I'm already ready.
Are you still there, Sabrina? We lost Jade.
Yes. Oh wait.
Can you hear me?
There we go.
Yeah, we just cut out for a sec. Sorry about that. But you were just talking about, yeah.
Yeah, so I should mention, that's another thing I always mention at the beginning of class. I tell every single one of the students, I'm like, at some point during the course of this class, you are going to have a technical issue. So I always raise, I said, if you might get kicked out of Zoom, your audio may not work, your camera might not work, you might lag a little bit. If I ever disappear, just know I'm coming back. So I just try to pre-warn them. And then, like, at the end of the class, I'll ask, like, who didn't have a technical issue over the course of the class? And nobody can raise their hand. I'm like, see, I said, you might not remember, but I told you it was bound to happen.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks for bringing us back to that. I think that,
Okay. So, and it also works for me. So if something happens and I end up, like, getting kicked out of class, I've already told them that it was going to happen, not just to me, but to everyone. So the parent doesn't feel like, oh, your tech issues. I'm like, no. It's online. This happens. So, yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there too. So for everybody who's watching, you can let them know tech issues are bound to happen.
Thanks, Jade. You're really saving us on this one because we had issues when we started. We're having issues now. I think it's really great that you do that. And yeah, we've come so far with the online class technology that it's almost amazing that we have so few tech issues, even though we have them already. But thanks again for sharing that. Do you have any follow-ups?
Not right now.
Cool. Well then, so we've talked a lot about what happens in the live classroom with, you know, live chat or, you know, trying to manage kids who are acting certain ways or leaving their mics on and doing activities in the live class. But how do you keep learners engaged outside of the live class, either using the Outschool classroom or other tools? Jade, I know that you get tons and tons of classroom comments from learners. So I'd love if you could talk a little bit about, you know, why do they keep coming back even though it's not the live meeting?
Yes, because they like one another. No, I think, like, at the beginning of the class, you know, when I ask them to share something about themselves, there's always at least two students who share some passion. And then once they start writing about it, everybody else jumps in too. Like, I have two students right now who the reason they homeschool is because they're traveling gymnasts and they do a lot of competitions. And so then they started talking to each other, and they've never met, but they've been to some of the same competitions. Or so I think once they start engaging with one another, all the other students want to jump in and share, like, okay, well, you're a gymnast, well, guess what I do? Or you know, that just kind of helps engage them. And then for my other classes, the ELA classes, I put tasks in there. So I usually, like, if I have a class on a Monday, I give them their first assignment, and then on Wednesday or Thursday, I'll give them an additional task to complete. And then I tell the parents, like, this is optional, but it also helps, like, I noticed like a repeat of the issues that the students have with their writing, like they're, you know, passive, active voice, or they're changing their tense, or they're changing their pronouns. So I'll put something specifically for that each week, and I'll say, hey, can you write a sentence, write a complex sentence, show me a compound sentence, show me a compound complex sentence, just to keep them still working on whatever it is that they're learning. And also, like my ELA classes, I don't focus heavily on grammar rules because they're at the middle school, high school level. So I'm like, if I just throw it out there throughout the classes, they'll start picking it up. And I notice as they turn in their essays, I'm like, whoa, yes. Like one student, like, who kept on spelling there and there wrong, even though that's the one I always talk about, finally got it. So yeah, I just throw stuff out there in between class time so that they know that they have to come back, and that they know, you know, it's kind of a reminder. If they're not working on their essay and then all of a sudden 3 days later they see something pop up in there, they're like, oh, my essay. So they'll get back to the original assignment also.
Nice. I think that works really well because you have weekly classes, right? Like they meet once a week. So then giving something in between to kind of remind them. I have that for my own lessons sometimes. I'm like, oh, I totally forgot my lesson's on Thursday and I don't think about it until Wednesday. So I love that you're like posting in the classroom, messaging them, reminding them. What about you, Sabrina? How do you keep your learners engaged when it's not during a live class time?
I also highly believe in homework being optional wherever possible. Optional activities is what I call it, because as a kid, I was more motivated by, say, a challenge. Who can read the most books? And then you'll have a pizza party at the end, that sort of thing. Or let's say you made a competition like chess, Monopoly. There's a whole homeschooling philosophy called game schooling that puts it right in the forefront of, how can we learn this in a way that's also fun, maybe even creating our own board game along the way to support what we've been learning. So between games and projects, that is most of what I remember from my in-class experiences in the public school setting. So I think that's most of my classes are 1 hour, one time. So when I do have those weekly classes, it is fun to have, say, sending them optional quizzes. Oh, what score did you get? Whoa, could you beat that score? What do you think? You know, I'm not actually having them compare. I'm not hoping that they compare to each other so much as I'm hoping that they improve upon their score from yesterday. So that's how I try to keep up the engagement, and I hope that, you know, telling them how I'm excited to see them the next time around gets them motivated as well.
Yeah, I do think that the teacher's attitude helps a lot with that. So if you're excited, it's a lot easier for the kids to get excited too.
For sure.
Cool. So I think we're a little bit over time, but it's our first webinar, so I didn't know how long it was going to take. Thank you two for sticking around. Jade, Sabrina, do you think we have time to go through some audience questions, or should I let you all go?
I'm free. I had lunch already.
Okay. Okay. We have one question right now, but just wanted to put it out there to the audience. Thank you guys for sticking around past time. If you have questions, go ahead and type them into the Q&A. We'll be here for a few more minutes. I see we just have one right now, and it was, what does Sabrina teach on Outschool? I think that was asked a little bit earlier during the intros, but you've mentioned a few times now that you teach Spanish. Do you have any other subjects that you teach, actually?
Well, my research was in bilingual language acquisition. So what I'd really love to do is continue to develop classics based on that small group focus that I basically was trained in, and work towards improving upon grammar, reading, writing. But for now, my passion has been Spanish, and I'm also looking forward to developing later advanced courses in Spanish for children who are already well versed in it. And in addition to that, I'd love to add some classes on speech language pathology. I don't think enough students out there know that it's an option, and it's a field that's desperately in need of more participation.
Wow, that's really great. Thanks so much for sharing what you teach, beyond Spanish and what you're interested in teaching. I hope that we can see those classes from you soon. And we just got a question from Jamie, and she says, Jade, can you talk more about your larger classes that are lecture style? Do they mostly just watch quietly while you're lecturing? I know you take breaks, but what do you do between the breaks?
Yes. All of my classes are between 35 and 40 minutes. So I really try to only spend about 20, 25 minutes of that where I'm lecturing, where I'm explaining how to structure the essay. Like one of my courses, like the most popular class I have is Mastering the 5-Paragraph Essay. We do a definition essay, compare and contrast essay, the persuasive essay, and then an analysis. So with those breaks, basically what I'll do, I'll first start off lecturing. I'll explain the type of essay they're going to be writing. And then those breaks are really just me asking questions. So I'll ask a question, like with the definition essay. When we do that, I tell them, like, you'll either define a word, a concept, a term, or a phrase. And when I give the examples, I ask them to give me examples back. So one of those examples, I'm like, you're not using the dictionary for this essay. You're going to focus on the connotative meaning. Then I give an example, and then I ask them, what's a word that you use now that doesn't match the dictionary definition? When we do the compare and contrast essay, I use the Venn diagram as the graphic organizer, and then I have them all work on writing about the differences and the similarities. So even though I'm mostly lecturing, I still stop to ask questions so that they can participate and to also make sure that they understand what type of assignment they're going to be working on and how to structure those different essays.
Okay. That sounds really great. I'm glad that you were able to talk more about, how you manage that longer class and get some more interactivity there. And then for each of you, I think that you kind of went over this earlier, but one of our participants was a little bit late. So if each of you could tell what's about your average class size, and we'll go with Sabrina first.
I have a maximum of 5 in my Spanish classes. I find that the Outschool Zoom, it lets you see 5 at a time. So I don't want to be switching between panels to try to find a student. I just want them all to be there. Easy peasy.
And Jade, how about you?
For my book club classes, I cap it at 9. For my essay writing classes and also for my ELA classes, I cap at 15. But I was telling them earlier what I do now. I cap at 15 for my morning classes, and I'm now capping at 12, 13 for the evening classes, because in the morning, they're a lot calmer, so I can handle that many students. And then another thing that I do, like Sabrina was talking about, I want to see the students. So, I don't want to be swiping at the bottom trying to see everyone. So I turn my laptop on, and I just recently started doing this. So I'll have my laptop on, and I'll be able to see everyone. I keep it on that view for them, for student view, or I think it's called gallery view. I'm not sure what it's called. But I keep that view there, and then I'm on my iPad right here in front of me, but I can still look over and see their faces. So I still know what they're doing. It also helps me because sometimes I need to move all the video off the screen so I can see the entire PowerPoint that I'm working with.
Nice.
So, and I should mention, I did have a class with 21 students once, and it was when I first started. It was an accident. I didn't know that I could close the section, and I opened it. A parent asked me if she could enroll her child. I was like, yeah. So I added another seat. Somebody stole the seat before she got to it. And then I ended up with 21 students, and I would never do it again.
Yeah, that sounds like a handful. Oh, wow. So then Shannon has a question for Jade. Earlier, you mentioned that you tend to avoid worksheets, but I think that you also mentioned using a Venn diagram and a graphic organizer. So I think Shannon's question is, do you find worksheets related to study skills are good, not just worksheets that are busy work? What's the distinction that you draw there?
Yes, so I use graphic organizers for all of my classes, and then I tell the students it's because I'm a visual learner. I'm like, this is why, and I'm like, and if you're able to use the graphic organizer, so I do give them attachments for the different types of graphic organizers we use, and I tell them it's optional. So those type of worksheets are great. Like the parents like to use them. The students like to use them sometimes. Sometimes their parents make them use them, but I wouldn't give them a worksheet where it's like, read this section and find the thesis statement, or read this paragraph and highlight the topic sentence, highlight the supporting details, because a lot of times they don't do it. And then the parents might be like, okay, well, they didn't turn this assignment in. And I'm like, oh yeah, so I just don't do those types of worksheets. But I do give them like all the graphic organizers, like here's a graphic organizer. And I find sending them the links to the online activities and games that they can do at their own leisure has worked a lot better than me saying, do this and submit it, because it doesn't get submitted. The essays always get submitted, but then that extra component that will help them doesn't really, they're like, no, I'm not doing it, and they don't.
I see, cool. And then I think we have one more question so far, and I guess I'll open this up to either of you because I'm not sure what your experiences have been, but do you do anything differently when you have two students who are sharing a mic and camera?
When I have two students, I just make sure I know their names. Like when it's a brother and a sister, it's pretty easy to know, like to tell them apart. But I ask them like, okay, who's who? And then I just rename them. And then I make a note to myself, so when that class starts, I can make sure I put both of their names in that name section, so it's not just one of them responding. And if they respond in the chat box, if they have a name that starts with a different letter, I tell them, hey, okay, like right now I have two students, both their names start with a G, and they use the same camera. So I'm like, okay, type your name in after so I know which one of you asked. But if it's like a G and a K, I'm like, just put a K after. I'm like, and then I'll know you asked the question and not your brother or your sister.
Nice. Sabrina, do you have any experience having two learners sharing a device?
Yes, I do. And it's I can make it work. In the Spanish class, we always want to give feedback, of course, to the students to see how they're progressing. And it's very helpful, as Jade mentioned, to know what their name is and you know, which one is more outspoken, which one is shyer, and talk a little bit about what both of them are capable of.
Nice. Okay, that's a key tip from both of you. I hadn't thought about that. I think we're done with audience questions for now. Laura, did you have anything you wanted to ask these two?
Nope.
Okay, well, we had a really great time interviewing you. So thank you both so much for being here. Huge thank you. We're really happy that you shared your tips with everyone. And thank you everyone who tuned in live. And if you're watching the recording, great. If you're live, we'll wait till Zoom processes the recording, and then we'll share the video on our blog and in our Facebook group. In the meantime, I'd encourage everyone to keep the discussion going. If you have other questions, if you want to share your own tips, please go ahead and post in the Facebook group. If you're not a member of the Facebook group yet, as a published teacher, you can join. So go ahead and request, we'll let you in, and you can share all the tips that you have to give or ask all the questions. And if you have any tips about other topics, or if you'd like to host a webinar yourself, please reach out to me, Julie at outschool.com, and I'd be happy to set you up with something and see what we can do. The real purpose of this webinar is to help new and existing Outschool teachers sharpen their skills, continue to learn and become better teachers. So we're going to send a survey at the end of this session to ask y'all what you thought about it. If you have any feedback for us, we would love just your candid thoughts. And again, if you have topics that you'd like to see or that you'd like to host, please let us know. And we'll just try to continue to make this useful for you all. So just wanted to reiterate again, thank you, Jade and Sabrina. You guys are awesome. And I really love all of the tips that you shared about your engaging classes and your passionate students. And thanks, Laura, for being here as well. Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you. I hope it was helpful. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.